All right, good morning, everyone. State ready?
State's ready, Judge.
Defense?
Ready.
Bring it back. Good morning, welcome back. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Please be seated. It's my understanding that we have a juror playing hurt, so if you need to stand up, appreciate you toughening out and being here. State?
State calls Dr. Stephanie Zheng.
Welcome. You swear affirm the testimony about to give you the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. Adjust the microphone. Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please, and tell them where you work?
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephanie Zheng. My first name is Stephanie, that's spelled S-T-E-P-H-A-N-I-E. Last name is Zheng, Z-H-E-N-G. I am currently a medical examiner and I work for the Fulton County Medical Examiner Center.
How long have you been working for Fulton County?
I have been working there for, at this point, approximately 8 months.
Prior to Fulton County, where did you work?
I was at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation as a forensic pathology fellow.
And tell us what a forensic pathology fellow is.
In order to become a medical examiner, part of our training as physicians going into this field of medicine is completing a fellowship, which is specialized training in the field of forensic pathology. So I was acting as a doctor there, doing autopsies and examinations, but I was under the supervision of other forensic pathologists that worked there.
So when you say you were under the supervision of other forensic pathologists who worked there, were they present when you performed the autopsy?
Yes, they were in the morgue while I performed the autopsy, and they were also able to review my report and had to agree with my findings before that report could be completed.
How many autopsies have you performed as of right now, approximately?
In my fellowship year, I performed 202 autopsies, and then currently at Fulton, I've completed 160 autopsies.
Have you had the chance to testify as an expert yet in your role as a medical examiner?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Prior to this, I've testified 5 times.
Judge, the state tenders Dr. Stephanie Zheng as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection to Dr. Zheng.
So ordered. Folks, again, just like any witness, you can take the expert for whatever you deem appropriate. Thank you.
Dr. Zheng, can you briefly outline the steps you take when you perform an autopsy?
Yes, I can. First, for an autopsy, the body is received into our facility, so this would be at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation at the time. In terms of my role with that, when it is time to perform the autopsy, I examine the body bag, making sure that the tag matches the name and our case number in our record system. Then the body bag is opened, and then I examine the outside of the body, including any clothing that the person was wearing and any medical devices that are on the body. During this process, typically photographs are taken in order to have that preserved as a record. Then the clothing and medical devices are removed and the surface of the body is cleaned so that I can examine if there are any injuries or other marks on the surface, on the outside of the body. After this, there's something called the internal examination. That is when we make incisions into the body in order to examine the body cavities, the organs, and then each organ is removed, after which I will look at the organs one by one. I will section through the organs in order to see the inside of them and see if there are any growths, abnormalities, or injuries with each of the organs. During this process, also toxicology samples, if necessary, are taken. Things such as blood samples are collected, and if fingerprints or other evidence are needed or requested, we also take those samples during this process as well. After the actual physical part of the autopsy is over, I will then generate an autopsy report and write up my findings in terms of what types of injuries there are or other natural diseases in order to determine the cause and manner of death.
Did you perform an autopsy on the body of James Barron on March 11th of 2025?
May I refer to my report to refresh my recollection?
Absolutely.
Yes, I did.
And while the autopsy was being performed, were pictures taken?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness? Yes. Dr. Zheng, I'm going to show you what I've got marked States Exhibits 201 through 217. Have you reviewed these just prior?
Can I see those real quick?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure. Did you review these photos prior to walking into the courtroom today?
Yes, I have.
And do they truly and accurately depict what you saw when you performed the autopsy?
Yes.
Judge, the state tenders Exhibits 201 through 217 into evidence.
No objection to 201 through 217.
Admitted.
So starting with State's Exhibit 201, Judge, and we're going to, if we could please go to the Elmo.
It's pointed out.
What are we looking at here in this picture?
This is a photograph that was taken at the beginning of the autopsy while the bag and tags were still sealed. This shows the tag, which has the decedent's name on it and our case number. And then we have a metal placard there, also with the case number on it, in order to make sure that we have the correct case.
And did you perform an external exam in this case?
Yes, I did.
Did you collect any evidence for toxicology or trace evidence?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
The evidence for toxicology included blood, urine, and vitreous samples. The vitreous fluid is the fluid within the globe of the eye.
And what about anything for trace evidence?
For trace evidence, I collected fingernail clippings, head hair, fingerprints, clothing, a gunshot residue kit, and I also kept the brown bags that were surrounding the hands that were in this case.
Now moving to State's Exhibit 202, what are we looking at here?
This is a photograph that was taken when the body bag was opened, so this is before any cleaning or clothing or medical devices were removed.
And then State's Exhibit 203.
This is a continuation of that process of us taking the photographs before any clothing or medical devices are removed.
And State's Exhibit 204.
This is a continuation of the previous photographs of just making sure the entire body is photographed before anything is touched.
So were these pictures taken before the body was cleaned?
Yes.
And now looking at State's Exhibit 205. Did you observe any injuries to the face?
Yes, I did.
And tell the jury about the injuries that you observed.
The injuries that I observed on the face are a laceration on the bridge of the nose, which you can see in the photograph. There are also small scrapings of the skin that I call pseudo-stippling that are sort of surrounding this area of the laceration. In addition to this, there was a partial thickness laceration of the upper lip, a chip of one of the front teeth, and other abrasions on the face.
Now, when you're talking about the pseudo-stippling, is that this area here around the nose?
Yes, they are those pinpoint red marks surrounding that larger wound on the nose.
Is that the same or something different than the stippling that would come from a gunshot?
So let me start by explaining what stippling is. Stippling is a term that we use to describe when a gun is shot, gunpowder particles exit the gun besides just the bullet. Those particles can sometimes strike the skin surrounding an entrance wound. They can strike the skin hard enough to cause small scratches of the skin, and we call these abrasions. The stippling are going to look like small dot-like abrasions or red marks of the skin surrounding typically a gunshot entrance wound. In this case, this is what I described was called pseudo-stippling because I don't see a gunshot wound on the nose. However, other objects or particle matter that is striking the skin at a high speed can cause a very similar appearance to the stippling that is caused by gunshot particles striking the skin. So it could be particles from something else, such as if a bullet passed through an intermediate target and then there was particles released from whatever that target was, that striking the skin is an example of something that could cause a pseudo-stippling sort of appearance.
Now, the laceration on the nose in general and the injury to the lip, do you have an opinion about how those injuries were caused?
Lacerations are caused by blunt impacts to the tissue, which causes a splitting of the skin, and you get this sort of more irregular or jagged edge appearance because it's not like a clean cut. It's something blunt striking the skin and causing it to split. So from the laceration of the nose, my opinion is that something had struck this person's face, or something such as them falling down and hitting their face on the floor could also be a reason for why a laceration is there.
Now, I want to talk about some of the other injuries to the body, such as the gunshot wounds. Looking at State's Exhibit 206, what are we looking at here in State's Exhibit 206?
This is a photograph of the left side of the body, including the left arm and the left side of the chest. On the left arm, where the ruler is a circular gunshot entrance wound. And then behind that, on the chest, is a chest tube, which is something that the medical intervention or first responders put in place, and these are typically used when there are injuries within the chest that may have caused either collapse of the lung or if they needed to evacuate blood from the chest. And then surrounding this chest tube, I see, there's an abrasion sort of
We'll have another close-up in a minute.
Yes, there is an abrasion at the top of the insertion of the chest tube area.
Okay. And so looking at, before we go back to the abrasion, looking at State's Exhibit 207, what is that a picture of?
This is just a close-up shot of the gunshot entrance wound on the arm, and you can just see the details of the entrance wound a bit better here because it's more zoomed in.
Okay. And then moving to State's Exhibit 208, what is this?
This is a photo of the opposite aspect of the arm showing the exit wound.
Okay. So are you saying that the bullet went in one side of the arm and then came out the other side of the arm?
Yes.
Looking at State's Exhibit 209,
This is just a even closer photograph of the gunshot exit wound of the arm.
and State's Exhibit 210.
This is a photograph showing the anatomic relationship between where the exit of the arm is and then where the chest tube insertion site of the chest is.
And is there anything that you noted about the force of the skin slapping from or affecting the exit wound and coming into contact with the wound in the chest?
I'm sorry, can you explain to me
With the force
what?
of the skin, as the bullet is exiting the arm, cause anything or any markings on the bullet that is going into the chest?
It is possible for that to happen where if, for example, the arm was pressed very closely to the chest and then the bullet exited the arm and then went into the chest, there could be some striking of the skin against the skin on the chest from the force of the bullet exiting. In this image, I don't really see that.
Okay. And then in State's Exhibit 211.
This is a close-up of the chest tube insertion site before that medical device is removed, and you can see the ruler is near the top of the image, and that's close to where this dark semicircular abrasion is.
And then State's Exhibit 212. What are we looking at here?
This is a photo of the left side of the chest after the chest tube has been removed.
And State's Exhibit 213.
This is a close-up of that same area.
Okay, and is there anything noteworthy about the abrasion?
Yes, typically with a chest tube insertion, an incision is made and then the tube is inserted into the side of the chest. This type of abrasion was something that stood out to me while I was doing that autopsy because I would not expect to see an abrasion like that with just the chest tube procedure alone. Because there was a gunshot entrance and exit of the arm on the same side, this abrasion, it alerted me to the possibility that maybe the bullet also went into the chest as well.
Okay, so when we're talking about the abrasion, are you talking about this area here?
Yes.
Okay. And this area right here, is that where the chest tube went in?
Yes, you can see the center of that incision is a little bit circular because there was an object there before.
Okay. And looking at State's Exhibit 214.
This is an image I had after this metal probe was inserted into the gunshot wound of the arm and then into where that chest tube was. This was in order to help with determining the trajectory and that it was possible for a bullet to have entered and exited the arm and then entered the chest at around a similar level.
Did you locate a projectile in the body?
Yes.
And so at what point in the autopsy did you locate the projectile in the body?
As part of the examination, x-rays were taken of the body prior to beginning the autopsy. So going into this case, I already knew that there was one projectile in the body.
Okay, and I'm gonna flip to State's Exhibit. You know what you're doing. Okay. State's Exhibit 215. Now, when you say there was an X-ray, is this what you're talking about?
Yes.
And do you see the projectile here in State's Exhibit 215?
Yes.
Okay. Would you mind stepping down and showing the jury where?
Yes. The projectile I noticed on the x-ray is this white circular object at the tip of the pointer. So the way the x-ray is, this left side of the image is actually the right side of the body. So this was on the right side of the chest.
Okay, thank you. And then looking at the next X-ray, State's Exhibit 216. Is there anything else of note in 216?
No, this is just a different view of the body, and we typically take this in order to help determine how the orientation of the bullet or anything else we might find.
Okay. So having the aid of the X-ray and knowing where to look for the projectile, did you perform and you would anyway, perform an internal examination?
Yes.
So what did you do when you performed the internal examination?
Did you mean you wanted me to go through the entire process of the internal exam?
How about just the process as relates to finding the projectile?
So for the internal exam, since I knew there was a projectile in the body, that was something that I was looking for throughout the internal exam, but also in order to document the injuries that were caused by the projectile going through the chest, I collected blood from the chest cavities in order to see how much blood was lost. And I also observed if there were any injuries of any of the organs, making sure to note down which organs the bullet did pass through and the injuries associated with that. In doing so, it is possible for me to see sort of a trajectory of based on which organs the bullet passed through, and that led me to finding where the bullet was inside the body, and that was on the right side of the chest.
What did you learn when you performed the internal examination about the exact path of the bullet through the body once it entered the left side of the chest?
Did you want me to go through like the organs that were passed through or the direction?
Yes,
or both?
the organs, and direction.
Based on my findings, I could best determine that the bullet passed through the left eighth intercostal space, and that is the intercostal space is the space between the ribs, so that soft tissue there, it's mostly muscle and some vascular tissue. After that, the bullet passed through the left lung, the aorta, the right lung, then went through and fractured the right ninth rib, after which it was found in the soft tissue of the right lateral side of the chest.
And what would happen to a person once they received an injury like this, as far as the human body?
This is a fatal injury.
And so what would the immediate effect be of, or the soon in time effect be of the bullet passing through the aorta?
This is a very severe injury, as the aorta is the major blood vessel supplying the body. And I would expect that because of the massive blood loss this would cause, that very quickly the victim would become incapacitated.
And when you say incapacitated, are you talking about loss of motor function or brain function or some combination of that?
Both. Death would be quick in terms of the injuries sustained.
Could death be within seconds?
Yes.
And going back to the trajectory picture. So based on your examination and the picture and the trajectory shown in State's Exhibit 214, are your findings consistent with the victim standing up in a sideways and being in a sideways position when he was struck with a bullet in the left arm?
Yes, that is possible.
Now, I want to ask you about, did we talk about State's Exhibit 217. What is this a picture of?
This is a picture of the projectile that I recovered from the body. After it is recovered, the surface is rinsed slightly with water to make sure there were no tissue fragments that are being stored in the box. And then the bullet is placed in an evidence box and then labeled with the location where I found it, and then I initialed that as well.
And I'm going to hand you what I have marked as our Exhibit 188. Do you recognize this item?
Yes, this is the same evidence box with the label and bullet as in the picture.
And so what did you do with this item, State's Exhibit 188, after you packaged it?
It is retained in evidence, but I'm not aware of what happens after that.
Okay, so you seal it up and you put it back into evidence?
All I did was seal it into the evidence box, label it, and then make sure that that red tape on it was there. That's all I performed.
Okay. And did you form an opinion about the cause and manner of death in this case?
Yes, the cause of death was gunshot wounds of the torso and upper extremity, and the manner of death is homicide. And then for that cause of death, the wounds, plural, is in parentheses.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Good morning, Dr. Zheng.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming today. I want to go over some of the things you've already talked about and see if we can help clarify everything, okay? First, I want to talk to you about the trace evidence that you collected, okay? I think you said there was a gunshot residue kit that was collected.
Yes.
Okay. After that's collected, you don't have any control over that or any of that business. You're not in charge of that. Is that correct?
Yes, I collected it and put labels on it, and after that, I did not do anything else with it.
Do you have your autopsy report in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. Will you tell us, well, did you weigh and also measure the height of the deceased?
Yes, I did.
And what was the height of the deceased?
In my report, the height is recorded as 75 inches.
And translating that to the way people typically refer to a height, that would be 6'3". Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. Didn't mean to make you do math. 6'3", and the weight of the body was what?
235 pounds.
Okay. The shot in this case went, in essence, through his left arm, out his left arm, into his body, and lodged in his right chest.
Yes, that is what I believe is most likely.
And on its path, what it did that was especially fatal was it struck the aorta.
Yes,
And you would expect that when that is hit by a projectile in the body, a tremendous amount of blood
yes,
is going to be unleashed out of this left-hand side and in the body as well.
yes. A lot of the blood was still in the chest cavities.
Tell me about that. Tell me how, or I guess the mechanism, when it does pierce the aorta, if you know how much blood is still left inside of the cavity of the body. Did you actually weigh that, or could you tell that?
Yes, the amount of blood that I measured that remained inside the chest cavities were that I collected 875 milliliters of blood from the right chest cavity and then 600 from the left chest cavity.
And I'm correct if I say that that's not normally the amount of blood you would find in a person who hasn't suffered an injury, right?
Correct. The chest cavities should not have any blood just in the cavity itself.
This is directly a result of the shot.
Yes.
After sustaining an injury like this, you have testified that you would expect that very quickly the person would become incapacitated.
Yes.
Am I correct that they are capable, after receiving this injury, of coughing?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. The shot does go into the lung, is that right?
It does. It enters both lungs.
Okay. Can you state categorically there's no way the person would be capable of coughing in the instant after the shot?
I don't know.
Okay. And talking about the manner of death, which you've called homicide, okay? I want to talk to you about that just a bit.
Okay.
Okay? When you say homicide, what that means in medical terms is that it's at the hands of another.
Yes. My manner of death on the report is a medical classification, and homicide is death at the hands of another.
It's not a legal classification. You're not calling this a murder.
No.
You mean that medically you're determining this is death at the hands of someone else, and that's why we call it a homicide.
Yes.
In fact, in self-defense cases, medically, you will still call that a homicide.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about that injury to the bridge area of the nose. Here we go. Quickly, before we do that, let me show you State's Exhibit 203. Oh, I'm sorry. In State's 203, we can see that the genital area of the deceased has been shaved in some way, shape, or form, meaning it doesn't have hair on it. Correct?
Yes, this is how the body was received.
I know, and that's what I'm getting to. You didn't shave the deceased in any way, shape, or form.
No.
Okay. Talking about States 205. Let me see. Staying straight up. Okay. What we have here is an injury to the bridge of the nose, and we have stippling around that very injury, correct?
The stippling is pseudo-stippling.
I'm sorry, yeah, pseudo-stippling, and we're going to go into what that is. Pseudo-stippling and an injury to the bridge.
Yes.
Okay. And what you have explained is that pseudo-stippling means incredibly fast particles are striking the skin, fast moving.
Yes, the particles are fast enough to cause scraping of the skin, which is where those pinpoint red marks come from.
And that would be consistent with a bullet being fired through an intermediary object and the material from the intermediary object striking that area and causing that stippling. Yes?
Yes, that's possible.
And when we are looking at this injury, that sort of split on the nose, that split can also be related to being struck in the face with the very fast shot particles.
Yes, that's possible. The injury on the nose is from a blunt impact, so it could be from maybe something larger than a particle as well.
Could be from the material from the door that flies and strikes him at the face, along with stippling, pseudo-stippling.
That's possible.
Could be from the very quick incapacitation of the body and falling and striking some object, the back of the door or at the floor even.
Yes, that's also possible.
And as well as we look at the bottom of 203, what you call a chipped tooth and the injury to the inside of the lip. We want to talk about that, okay?
Yes.
Okay. That too is consistent with a fall and hitting both the inside of the lip and the tooth.
The injury to the lip is consistent with a fall, so that perhaps the teeth had basically struck the inner part of the upper lip from like a fall, an impact like that. Yes, that lip injury is consistent with that. As for the chip on the teeth, I cannot determine whether that was there prior or that happened close to this event.
Gotcha. Coming back to the injury that Mr. Barron sustained, you've said that this is a fatal injury. I mean, there's no way to save a person when this has occurred. Is that accurate?
It would be very difficult to, yes. I believe this is a fatal injury.
Once it's sustained, even if you've got, an ER ready to go and they're ready to do an intervention and they've got all the tools, they're not going to be successful with this sort of an injury. Is that fair? I
would not expect them to be.
When I want to ask you some questions about a body after receiving an injury like this, okay, and how we might expect to find it, if you will, okay? And if you don't speculate, but I just kind of want to know what your opinions are about how a body that sustained this kind of an injury would appear or would be, okay? So specifically, what I want to ask you about is if a body has sustained this injury and you do not find a pulse, a physical pulse, right, where you can, there are various places you can check pulse, right?
Yes.
One of them is here on the neck.
Yes, the carotid pulse, yes.
There's also one on the, can you check a pulse here also? At the,
Yes, you can.
and I'm indicating at my, what would you call that? Ankle. At the ankle?
Yes, you can check pulse there.
You can check pulses physically in those two places, okay? And if you don't get a physical pulse, is it possible that emergency personnel who have one of those machines that they can hook up to a person to check for an electrical pulse, is it possible they would actually get a pulse?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a clinician in that regard.
Okay. Are you familiar with and did you look at the EMS records from them collecting him and how did you know anything about the pulse, the electric pulse that they found?
I did not look at the EMS records.
Okay. I want to ask you about one of the examinations, or about the examination of his brain specifically, okay? And I had asked you this before when we talked on the phone. What is CTE?
Can you say the full?
Encephalopathy, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what
Yeah.
you meant?
And just to refresh your recollection, when we spoke on the phone, I was asking you about whether you had done an examination of his brain in the autopsy to see if he had CTE. Remember that?
I did examine the brain. Yes.
And I was asking if you had actually done an examination to check for CTE. Do you remember that? And I think you said there was no reason to do that. Does that sound right?
I don't remember the specifics of that. However, in terms of the autopsy examination for the brain, I did examine the brain and I sectioned through the brain, and if there was anything that I could identify that was abnormal, then I would have looked into that further.
Okay. Do you have to do a histological examination for a CTE?
In order to see any sort of cellular changes, yes, I would expect that histology would be done if that specific condition was a concern.
And in this case, you didn't do a histological examination because nobody told you to look for that. Is that accurate?
In this case, I did not perform a histological examination because the cause of death to me was clear that the injuries sustained to the organs of the chest were so severe that any other kind of natural conditions that would require microscopic examination it would not be necessary to perform those, because the cause of death was as a result of the gunshot wound. In addition to this, when I examined the brain itself, I did not notice any gross abnormalities that would lead me to do a microscopic examination of the brain.
I want to ask you now about the body's ability to perceive things, meaning hear and see things, okay? And I'd asked you this earlier on the phone, but is a person, after a shot is fired, is a person capable of perceiving that bullet prior to it hitting them?
What do you mean by perceive? Like seeing?
Seeing or hearing it. Seeing or hearing it before it hits them.
I think that questions about what somebody can perceive is really just a layperson sort of a question and not really an appropriate question for this witness.
She's an expert.
I'll overrule it.
Thank
If
you.
she knows, great. If not, that's fine.
I don't know.
And not to push you on this, but do you remember when we talked earlier, you said you wouldn't think so? You wouldn't think they would be able to see or hear that?
I'm not a gunshot or firearms expert. I know that the sound of the bullet being fired occurs prior and that the time it takes for it to get to the target takes time. I don't know how to answer that question.
In other words, you don't know if the bullet gets there first or the sound?
I don't know.
Okay. What sort of, I want to ask you about injuries to a person's head specifically, okay? Not necessarily with involving this case, okay? But you've examined, I don't know, how many autopsies you say you've done?
I performed about 360 autopsies.
360. I want to ask you specifically just about head injuries in autopsies, okay? What sort of force would it take for a softball-size injury to be apparent on a person's skull?
I do not know.
Is that something that you find frequently or that at least you've seen before in your autopsies?
Specifically asking about,
Softball-size head injury from blunt trauma?
no.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
May the witness be excused.
Any objection? Thank you for your testimony. You're excused. Thank you.